Okay, welcome everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to this CSDMS webinar. Today, we're thrilled to have a presentation from Professor Kevin Hsu. Kevin is the director of the Coastal Studies Institute and the James P. Morgan Distinguished Professor in the Department of Oceanography and Coastal Sciences at Louisiana State University. And Kevin's going to be talking about a review of sediment transport models in the northern Gulf of Mexico. Over to you.
Thank you, Greg. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kevin Hsu. Today, I'm going to talk about the sediment transport models in the Northern Gulf. So in the first slide, I would like to briefly introduce myself. So I'm a geological oceanographer. I study sediment transport. So in my lab, we mainly use three methods to study the sediment, okay? So the first method is to use geophysical method to collect the bathymetry, side scan, and sub-bottom data, and that's an angle on the top. We also use platforms or tripod to deploy optical or acoustic sensors in the bays and the oceans. And then another method is numerical modeling of the sediment transport. So I spend about 1/3 of my time on the modeling of sediment transport and hydrodynamics. So today I'm going to talk about the modeling studies I have been involved over the past 15 years also. So a little bit background information about fluvial sediment dispersal on the continental shelf. Let's say we have a river delivering water and sediment into the coastal area. You have an estuarine plume like this. And then this is the inner continental shelf. This is the middle continental shelf. The whole process is impacted by winds, alongshore currents, and the waves. And then in the bottom, we call this as a high turbidity bottom boundary layer, which is BBL. And then this layer is influenced by not only waves, but also currents. And then, of course, we have both physical and biological mixing. So if we think about the dispersal processes, we have about a total of 4 stages. So this is like a short perpendicular transect. Initially, the sediment is supplied by the river plume. There's initial deposition. After that, sediment is either resuspended by waves and currents, or sediment is moved downslope by failure process, such as submarine landslide. After many cycles, there will be a long-term net accumulation over here. So if we zoom into this slide and think about the whole process, there are lots of sediment transport processes involved. So here we have atmosphere on the top, ocean over here, the seabed or sediment over here. And then we have lots of processes involved. So in the plume supply, right after the supply by the river plume, sediment start to settle under the control for gravity. If it's a very large amount of sediment supply, you may have light attenuation. Basically, the light is blocked by high turbidity. This would impact the photosynthesis and the biological processes. If you have a little bit salt in the water, or if you have even some organic matter, and then flocculation may occur in cohesive sediment. If the seabed is fairly steep, then the slope processes will play a key factor here. You don't need a super steep slope. Sometimes just like a half-degree slope is enough to trigger some slope failure process. Throughout the whole seabed, we deal with erodibility, and this is a big unknown factor. We try to figure out, okay, are we dealing with mud or sand? Is it very erodible, right? How old is the mud? Is a fresh mud supplied by the river, or is like much older mud on the seabed? And then in the bottom boundary layer, this can be a current BBL, or a wave BBL. For the wave BBL, it's only a few centimeters thick, but it's a key layer to trigger submarine sediment transport. And then, of course, after the initial deposition, mud will consolidate. There's dewatering. You have to deal with bad consolidation, and eventually, when you have sediment erosion deposition, it would also impact the geochemistry. Okay, so those processes are all involved. So in my today's talk, I'm going to review several articles. Okay, so I have a long list over here. This might be a little bit overwhelming, but let me explain. So I'm going to begin with John Warner's article. Basically, a group of authors developed a model, a sediment transport model in ROMS. Okay, so throughout my today's talk, most of the modeling studies used John Warner's model. Okay. And then I will talk about the sediment dispersal from two large rivers, Mississippi, Atchafalaya. And then I will talk about the sediment transport during two large hurricanes in the year 2005, Katrina and Rita. After that, I will look into the dispersal of Atchafalaya sediment onto ship shoal, which is a large submarine shoal being used for dredging and coastal restoration project. Then after that, I will talk about the wave boundary layer, which is a very important thin layer on the bottom. This was led by Zhengchen Zhang and George Xue. And then I will talk about biogeochemical modeling effort led by Julia Moriarty. So together we published two papers in 2017 and 18. Toward the end of my talk, I will introduce Chris Sherwood's bed consolidation model and some ongoing Miss Delta modeling effort in my group. Okay, so that's a outline. I know it's lots of information, but I will guide you through those papers one by one. Bear with me. Okay, so back in the year 2008, there was an article published by a group of authors. So John Warner was the lead author. So basically, the co-authors developed a new sediment transport model in ROMS, which is Regional Ocean Modeling System. So this model was developed under a system called Community Sediment Transport Modeling System, is CSDMS. Okay, so in this model, lots of processes are included. For example, the settling of the sediment, the resuspension of sediment from the seabed. There are sediment layers resolved in the bed layers. Okay, and this is one diagram just to show the setup for the erosional process on the seabed as well as for deposition. So in this model, the users can define the thickness of an active layer, and then the model will keep tracking the thickness of all the layers into the seabed, and then wherever you have strong waves or tides, sediment will be resuspended, and then you may either split the layer on the bottom, or sometimes you even merge the layer on the bottom in order to keep the total number of the layers the same throughout the model simulation. So since this publication, we have me and many of my collaborators, we applied this model into the northern Gulf of Mexico, mainly on the Louisiana coast. Okay, so this is the satellite image. So New Orleans, a big city in Louisiana, is over here. The Birdfoot Mississippi Delta over here, which is a major outlet. And then we have Atchafalaya River flowing through Atchafalaya Bay. And here there are two small deltas. The west one is called the Westlake Delta, and the east one is called Atchafalaya Delta. Okay, so here I also mark the location for ship shoal because later I will talk about this large sandy shoal and how Atchafalaya Bay sediment plume impact this shoal. And of course, we are right next to the northern Gulf of Mexico. So in 2011, me and my collaborators published a paper on continental shelf research. So I was doing my postdoc work at VIMS. So Courtney Harris was my postdoc advisor. We collaborated with Rob Hetland, who is a physical oceanographer at Texas A&M. And then Jim Kahato provided wave data for this modeling effort. So Steve DeMarco from Texas A&M was the lead PI. Our project was funded by the AngleMax project. Okay, regarding the model, so this is the 3D model we deal with. So the model domain is about 800 by 300 kilometer. So each grid cell is somewhere between 2 to 5 kilometer. We don't have any tide. Okay, we focus on the year 1993, during which there was actually a big storm event. So when I set up the model, I would say one of the biggest challenge is to provide the parameters. Okay, so I spent lots of time on settling velocity. So we did a sensitivity test. So the top panel is the settling velocity at 1 millimeter per second, which is fairly fast. The middle panel is 0.1, and the bottom panel is 0.01. Okay, so the colors are all in a log scale. This is log base 10 in kilogram of sediment deposited per meter square of seabed. Okay, so if we use a fast settling velocity, Mississippi sediment all deposited right on the delta. Okay, again, this is the log scale from +2 to -4, a huge variation. Okay, so a huge variation. But if we use a faster settling velocity, what we found was that, okay, Atchafalaya sediment deposit right there. They don't go very far, okay? We already know that Atchafalaya sediment can actually be resuspended and travel to the west to nourish the Cheniere plain, okay? So that doesn't make sense to us. If we use a very slow settling velocity like this, sediment is everywhere. So, okay, everywhere is almost yellow. We even see a relatively low deposition on the delta. That doesn't make sense at all because this is not how we build the delta, right? When the river dumps sediment to the ocean, you have a rapid accumulation right at the river mouth. So we basically, we believe that A doesn't make sense, C doesn't make sense either, okay? So eventually we decided that B is more reasonable. So basically, Atchafalaya sediment can travel to the west to help to maintain the Cheniere plain. Mississippi Delta sediment right here, but you still see some kind of eastward and westward transport. So this is the sensitivity test. And then we calculated the deposition, okay? So what I did, we basically sum up the sediment along each column. So here's my grid cell, right? So along each column like this, I sum them up and I try to figure out the actual amount of sediment, okay? So over here, you can see in the west side, this is a Atchafalaya Bay mouth. I have high sediment accumulation. You can also see a little bit westward dispersal. On the delta, this is right offshore of Southwest Pass, which is the red area over here. And the middle one is the west edge of the delta. The east one is the east edge, okay? So if we just sum up the whole column in my model grid, and this is the distribution. So still, because this is in log scale, right? Here the color is in log scale, but this is the linear scale. But as you can see, the majority of the sediment deposited right next to the river mouth, okay? So this is highly influenced by the proximity, how far you are from the river sources, okay? So this is the first paper I published back in 2011. So after that, we looked at another study, which is the hurricanes Katrina and Rita, okay? So we were interested in, okay, if you have a big hurricane passing by, how does the hurricane disturb the seabed? Is this model robust enough to quantify the erosion deposition? Okay, remember the year 1993 is kind of a normal year, but now we are dealing with extreme condition. We are dealing with crazy conditions, okay? I'm going to show you some numbers. So for this study, I collaborated with Courtney, but we also got some new wind and wave data from Jim Chen, Colin Hu. We also got the physical model from Rob Hetley. So a little bit background information about those two hurricanes, okay? So in the year 2005, Hurricane Katrina made the landfall in the eastern side, okay? So the colors correspond to different category. So H5 is category 5. So just based on the track lines, you can tell that, so this is the shoreline, here is the shelf break. Hurricane Katrina made a direct hit, okay? So Hurricane Katrina only spent a few hours from the shelf break directly over the delta. It was a direct, nearly perpendicular hit. And then this was actually a rapid passing. Hurricane Rita, on the other hand, passed over a much longer pass, okay? It's at an angle, and this is a broad and a flat continental shelf, okay? So those two processes are quite different. And as probably all of us know, the Hurricane Katrina was a quite devastating hurricane. It was a category 5. Economic loss was over 80 billion, right? The deaths of over 18,000 people. It was a big, big disaster in US history. And this is a picture about the flooded New Orleans City. So when I was running the model, the biggest struggle to me was to select the parameters, right? So I would like to show this table. And when I finish my talk, I will talk about those 3 parameters again. So for any sediment transport modelers, right? One of the biggest challenges to select the parameter. So for erosional rate, this is my study, but I also borrow the numbers from previous study and take a look. The numbers can vary from 0.1 to 1 to 10. So this is 2 orders of magnitude difference. Settling velocity, 0.1, 1, and 10. Okay, so we try those numbers. Again, 2 order magnitude difference. Critical shear stress, going from 0.02 to 0.53. And then the high number here is almost 25 times the low number. Okay, a big range we are dealing with. And in my modeling effort for those 2 hurricanes, we had to use many, many different levels. We tried to test the critical shear stress from low to high, and then I made lots of effort. So it was a little bit tedious, but it's very time consuming to test those parameters. Okay, so let's take a look at the result. So I have Katrina on the left, Rita on the right, wind on top, wave in the middle, and nearby the wave orbital velocity, which is a proxy for the wave-induced shear stress on the bottom. So let's take a look at the numbers, okay? So we are dealing with over 50 meters per second wind. And then now look at the wave, okay? The wave height, significant wave height was exceeding 25 meters. That's 75 feet tall waves. Gigantic numbers, right? We have to deal with extreme numbers. Orbital velocity over 3 meters per second, which is huge, okay? Again, so rapid and fast and energetic hurricane passing by over here, and then Rita took a longer path, okay? Lots of impact on outer shelf, but in the inner shelf, the impact is smaller because this is the color yellow and this is the color red, okay? So those 2 are very different. And then if we take a look at the wind speed and wave height, and this is right before Katrina made the landfall, you can actually see stronger winds on the east side, which caused the most damage over here, okay? And then again, for Rita, also the peak wind are always on the east side. And west side is a little bit okay. And then over here, if you look at the shear stress, very high shear stress, you see sediment resuspension nearly everywhere. Over here, you see the blue, and this is actually the sandy shoal, and the ship shoal area is over here. So grain size played a role here, okay? You can suspend lots of mud, but sand is harder for you to suspend. Similar pattern over here, and this low concentration zone is mainly due to the grain size. Now, we were able to collect lots of data, including the observational data, okay? So I'm going to show you some results at different stations. This is Katrina, here's Rita. There's a station right offshore of Southwest Pass. So I call this as the Mississippi River Delta, short name is MISS, okay? So this is right over here. Now let's take a look at the change, okay? So for MISS, which is black, peak wind, 50 meter per second. Peak shear stress, 50 Pascal. Okay, this is a huge number because normally we deal with a shear stress between 1 and 10, but over here we are dealing with a 50. Over 1.5 meter of sediment is eroded at this location. Okay, so we had to deal with lots of model stability issues, but overall, we were able to run the model, and the model was very robust. The model was capable to deal with this extreme condition, okay? Extreme condition. But if you compare Katrina with Rita on the east side, of course, Katrina's impact is much larger in those areas over here. So that's about Katrina and Rita. So since that publication, we were collaborating with another modeling group. So George Xue joined LSU. We have Yan Da-O and Zhengchen Zhang, who both work in Dr. George Xue's group. So we were looking at the sediment dispersal impact on ship shoal. So why do we care about this? Okay, so our model domain is inside this area. Again, this is Atchafalaya Bay. Here's Terrebonne Bay. And this is actually a sizable submarine shoal. There are several dredge pits located in this region. So there's one pit in the middle, the black dot. There's another larger pit over here, which is the another dredge pit for Barrier Island Restoration Project over here, okay? So Louisiana Coastal Protection Restoration Authority, CPRA, they care a lot about the conditions of the dredge pit due to dredging. They also care about whether the sand can fill in the dredge pit, and then the dredge pit can be reused for future restoration project, okay? So my group, we were founded by Bureau of Ocean Energy Management to study the sediment dynamics in those two areas. So in those two areas, they are pretty shallow and sandy, okay? And then if you look at the grain size, here we have the grain size plot, okay? So everywhere in red is sand. So ship shoal is located over here. It's covered by lots of sand. But we also have some, we also saw some publications about fluid mud occasionally hugging the ship shoal, and this shoal is covered by a blanket of mud occasionally, okay? So our modeling study is to figure out, okay, does the sediment from Mississippi, from Atchafalaya River reach ship shoal, okay? How much can reach there, and what will be the impact? So this is our study. So we did a interesting test. We basically generated lots of sediment tracers in the red or orange area. So basically everywhere shallower than 5 meters, we have lots of sediment tracers. We start the model run at the beginning. Deeper than 5 meters, we have no sediment from the sediment shallower than 5 meters. Okay, so basically inner shelf, Atchafalaya Bay, Terrebonne Bay, this is the one sediment class, and no such sediment in the deep ocean, in the deeper part of the shelf at all. And then after 2 years of model run, we check the distribution of the seabed sediment. Okay, now interestingly, we see lots of sediment transported from the shallow water to the deep water, and some of them even pass the ship shoal and even deposit in the deeper part. But again, this is a log scale. Okay, this is a log scale. But this modeling study confirmed that the inner shelf is fairly dynamic. And then sediment, the mud in the inner shelf from Atchafalaya River can be mobilized, transported to the west, but sometimes they can also be delivered to the ship shoal. They stay there for a short period of time, and then they were reworked and resuspended and deposited in the deeper part of the ocean. So it's a very cool story. Okay, after this, let's take a look at another study. So we collaborated with Dr. Zhengchen Zhang, George Xue, and many others to study the fluid mud process. So we look at wave-supported gravity flow, and then in this modeling effort, Dr. Zhengchen Zhang added a new layer, which is a wave boundary layer right between water sediment interface. Again, as I mentioned, this is a very thin layer, normally just a few centimeters thick. And then Dr. Zhang modeled this area from Atchafalaya Bay to the offshore area next to Cheniere Plain. There are two transects. Transect A is located over here. And now let's take a look at the result. So on the left side, we have 3 cold front events, number 1, 2, and 3. And this is all based on CSDMS regular benchmark runs. To the right side, Dr. Zhang added a new wave boundary layer. As you can tell, you can see very high turbidity over here, up to almost 10 gram per liter, which is the threshold to trigger fluid mud process. So if you compare the bottom during cold front number 3, the fluid mud can actually be formed here, delivered into the deeper part at about 6 meter water depths. And this is a big difference between the wave boundary layer model run and the regular one, CSDMS. Okay, so after this, I want to talk about some biogeochemical modeling effort, okay? So as I mentioned, I was hired as a postdoc working with Courtney Harris. So the whole project was focused on the process or the mechanism controlling hypoxia. Okay, so when I was hired, I was working on that model, but I was also working on the coupling of the sediment with flux and the biogeochemical processes. So during my postdoc research, I started this kind of modeling effort, but I couldn't finish it. And then Julia was hired by Courtney to do the coupling. So she initially published a paper to study a river in France. So this is the processes, okay? So there is a module already in ROMS. It was developed by Fennell et al. So we call this as an MPZD model. And then the CSTMS model already includes the suspended sediment, seabed erosion and deposition. And then the seabed biogeochemistry model was developed by Sotars et al. Julia's effort was mainly to couple 1, 2, and 3 model together so that we can track what's going on in the water and what's going on in the seabed. And then eventually Julia applied this model to the Northern Gulf of Mexico to look at the impact on the hypoxia. So here is the modeling result. I have lots of panels here. Due to limited time, I won't be able to talk about the details, but I would like to draw your attention to the third panel, third row over here, okay? So this is a standard model run without the coupling. And this is actually the difference due to the sediment resuspension. As you can tell, if we couple sediment resuspension, remineralization, and the hydrological and biological processes, we would see more decrease, we would see a significant decrease of dissolved oxygen in the bottom of the water column, especially in the so-called dead zone over here, okay? So this is actually a significant effort to couple three complicated models. Okay, so next. So in the year 2018, Chris Sherwood was leading another modeling effort to further incorporate bed consolidation with the modeling system, which is called COAST. Okay, you can see lots of modeling effort over here. So J. Paul was leading some early studies, Courtney was involved, and we also have several co-authors over here. So in this new modeling effort, we mainly, Sherwood et al. Mainly deal with the bed consolidation and swelling. Okay, so this is seawater. Here's the seabed surface, and this is the erodibility curve. So basically, the idea is that on the surface, sediment is more erodible. Even if you apply just a small shear stress, you would be able to erode the loss of sediment. But if you deal with the sediment in the deeper layers, they would be more, it's harder to erode them, okay? And then if you have a newly deposited sediment, this is nearly vertical. That means they are very mobile, very easy to suspend. And then the dashed line over here eventually will change toward this black line. This is called consolidation. The opposite would be seabed swelling, and then you will go from this one to here, okay? So now let's talk about the Miss Delta project. So the Miss Delta project was funded by National Academy of Science. The full name is called Mississippi River Delta Transition Initiative. And this is a large project. The total budget is about $22 million. It was funded by the GRP program, Gulf Research Program, under National Academy. So in this project, we have many partners, and this is more like a consortium. We have, in total, I think we have about 40 PIs. We have about 40 professors working on this project, okay? So it's a huge project. So in this project, we have a very ambitious modeling effort. So we have a large basin model in yellow, Gulf model in green, and both model domains are being used by Dr. George Xue's group. And then we have a lower river and the shelf model led by Ehab Masali and Colin Hu from Tulane. And then within this domain, my group focuses on the delta, which is very small in this domain right over here. So my PhD student, Nikki Du, is developing a 3D model. Our model domain is the red polygon over here. Our focus is on the delta. And overall sediment transport is to the west, but we try to cover some good area in the east side. We also cover the deeper part of the Gulf, okay? So the details are over here. In this 3D model, we have water. Right now we use 18 layers on the seabed. We try to use about 40 layers to fully resolve the bed consolidation and stratigraphy. And in this modeling effort, we have, as mentioned, we have a large team, okay? So me and Nikki, we run the model. We get core data from Sam Bentley and Fifth. And this is actually a very nice map to show beryllium 7 sediment accumulation. The bigger the circles, the higher the sediment accumulation rate. We get ocean boundary condition from George Xue. We get river boundary condition from Ehab Masali. We also collaborate with Courtney Harris and Jingwei Chang, who are working on the integration of Beryllium 7 bed consolidation model into the newest version of COAST. Okay, so this is our ongoing modeling effort. Okay, so that should wrap up my talk. So before I wrap up, I want to revisit this slide, okay? So as you can tell, there have been lots of numerical modeling efforts in the Northern Gulf of Mexico. We focus on different efforts, right? For example, my early modeling study focused on the settling, the dispersal, and then we have scientists, well, for example, Zhengchen Zhang focused on the wave bottom boundary layer. Julia's work focused on bed geochemistry. Now the bed consolidation model is in COAST. We are integrating lots of processes over here. And then if you look at the processes, we have a 3A, which is sediment transport by waves and currents. And then we also have 3B, which is the slope failure processes. For example, on the Mississippi Delta, we have extensive submarine landslide. We have gullies, we have lobes, we deal with submarine landslide. But if you look at the modeling effort, very often 3A and 3B are separate. We have a large group of model users who focus on 3A, truly 3D. And then we have a smaller number of modelers who are doing the slope failure, but very often they use either 2D short perpendicular transect or maybe just a 1D vertical, okay, in a more idealized domain. So I haven't seen too many modeling efforts about submarine landslide in true 3D, okay? So this would be an opportunity for lots of system model developers, because I know like in this Zoom virtual room, we have lots of modelers who study landslide on the river basin, right, on the land. But there are not that many studies about slope failure in the deeper part. And very often we study either 3A or 3B. There's a disconnect. So a few thoughts about the modeling, right? I feel that there will be opportunity for people to study not only 3A, but also 3B. To the best of my knowledge, I don't know any modelers who integrate 3A and 3B, although they both are driven by wave, currents, slope, and geotechnical property of the seabed sediment. Second, parameters, right? All the sediment transport modelers struggle with the parameter. Those three are the top three we struggle with. I feel that we can try to solve this using numerical models, but I also feel that maybe we can use machine learning or AI to resolve those. And then the model of cohesive processes, for example, fluid mud, flocculation, the seabed consolidation, those are really, really challenging. There are limited publications about those processes. And one reason we cannot model this well is because we don't have good measurement, okay? So for example, flocculation at the river mouth. The seabed erodibility, there's a very limited study on the marsh or on the continental shelf, okay? It's really, really challenging to study. If you think about the whole North America, right? So the Mississippi River is called Big Muddy, right? We are on a muddy delta. We have lots of mud. But if you look at the publications, not too many publications about flocculation. Less than 5 scientists use cameras or LIST to study flux at the Mississippi River mouth. That's a surprise to lots of cohesive sediment transport modelers, right? Not too many studies about erodibility either. Again, the slope failure process is very challenging, but I think this might be an opportunity. In our whole modeling group, We have people who study the land, who study the ocean, but there are lots of landslide modeling effort in the river basins on the mountains, but I see opportunities over here. Gravity-driven sediment transport is very important. We care about waves, currents, as well as slopes. I think this kind of process should be integrated into the coastal system. So that's all what I have. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin. That was so interesting. At this point, we'll open it up for questions. You can use the raise hand feature, or you can just post a question in the chat. Um, while you all are pondering what to ask, I have a question. I work in fluvial geomorphology, and I'm used to thinking of critical shear stress and settling velocity as being things that depend on grain size. Is that still true in the marine world? And is it why don't you guys think in terms of I need to understand what the grain size is as the sort of thing that's behind these parameters, if that makes sense?
Mm-hmm. Let me go back to the table. So first of all, yes, grain size plays a role, right? So if we deal with non-cohesive sediment, if we know the grain size, it's relatively easy to get the critical shear stress and settling velocity. The mud is complicated. If we deal with fresh mud deposit from the river, or if we deal with mobilize the sediment right after the passage of a hurricane, then you probably should use a very low. You should use a very low settling velocity and a very low critical shear stress. Okay, and then that would be one situation for the mud. But we also have consolidated mud in the deeper layers. We also have vegetation, plants, roots, shell fragments, going from marsh all the way to the shelf, right? So that would be a really challenging thing, and that's why we spend lots of time to tune the parameter. And erosion rate is really hard to get. Even if we use a ghost erosion chamber to do the measurement, we only have a few isolated points, and it's really hard to resolve this.
Right, that makes sense. Thank you. Other questions for Kevin? Okay, since they're being quiet, I'm going to jump in with another one then. I was really struck in your work on the storms that both Rita and Katrina do a huge amount of sediment transport across the shelf, and in the fluvial world, there's this sort of idea of thinking about the frequency and magnitude, meaning what fraction of flows or what fraction of the time or what fraction of events are responsible for transporting most of the sediment. Is there a similar framework that you or others have used to think about transport in the Gulf or other places that is like most of the sediment gets transported only 1% of the time in the most intense storms, or most of it is transported 80% of the time, just any time the waves are kicking up a little bit?
Oh, that's a great question. First of all, the sediment transport flux is very much event driven. It's very episodic. So we did some calculation on the fluxes, right? Let's say we have 365 days a year. We have a major hurricane category 5 passing the shelf, and the passage of the hurricane might be only 5 days, right? And then if you do the budget, you would realize that, okay, the 5-day hurricane sediment transport can account for more than 95% of the total annual flux. So it's very episodic. During the event, the flux is huge, much bigger. That's number one. Number two, regarding the long-term contribution from either fair weather, cold fronts, or hurricanes. It depends on lots of factors. I know some scientists study the impact of the sediment transport using synthetic hurricanes. So you can basically look at the hurricanes passing the Gulf over the past 50 years. You can get the probability, the drains, speed, pressure, the angle, right? Katrina is 90-degree, but Rita is at an inclined angle. And then you can actually simulate the conditions using synthetic hurricane. And then you can do a calculation on the sediment flux. So that would be another way to deal with that. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. That's really interesting. So I see there's a question in the chat from Georgios Grimpalakos. Georgios, do you want to ask your question verbally?
Yes, sorry. You also asked about the particle size. Does spherosity roundness influence what kind type of transportation the sediment happened during this area? And my English are not very good.
That's a great question. Yeah. So first of all, to be honest with you, in our model simulation, we do not use roundness or sphericity. Okay, that's like at a very small scale, a particle scale, right? We do not take into the consideration of the roundness and the sphericity. We do nudge the particle size, which can be mud or sand. We also nudge the settling velocity, okay? Based on what I know so far, I know the roundness and sphericity would impact the settling speed of the particle, right? So for example, if we deal with medium sand, if the particle is a perfect sphere, you can calculate it using Stokes' law, everything will be perfect. But if the particle is very rough, angular, and then you would create a turbulence and the particle would settle slowly, right? So slower than the number predicted using Stokes' law. So from that perspective, we can nudge the settling velocity. To us, there's no direct relationship between particle size and settling velocity for mud. For sand, there's a relationship we can use. Also, in the model, we use the several sediment tracers. We normally have like a coarser sediment. We have the bigger flux and small flux, which represent silt and clay respectively.
Thank you, Keiyu Shu.
You're welcome.
Also, a second part, if I can, which percentage of the sediment transportation was inflicted, it's not the exact word, was because of Katrina hurricane, or which part was from Rita hurricane, the part of the whole sediment that was transferred? Because I didn't
Yeah.
understand that part.
Yeah, so if we look at this seabed elevation plot, you can see how much, well, this is definitely from Katrina, and this is from Rita, right? And very often after the event, for example, in AB5, which is red, over here in the inner shelf, you even see a little bit deposition, okay? A slow deposition. So this is the erosion deposition here, and then this is another erosion and no much deposition, okay? So this is the seabed elevation curve. Just from this, you can figure out how much is from Katrina, how much is Rita from each of those 4 locations. And those 4 locations are over here, located in this area.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, here's one from Tian. Tian, do you want to read your question?
Um, yeah, so I'm wondering if you have any suggestions on the most promising applications of machine learning in sediment transport modeling. I know that you mentioned about estimate the parameters. I wonder if there are some other aspects that you think is a better application for machine learning. Thank you.
That's a great question. So in sediment transport models, we probably deal with more than 10 parameters. I only listed 3 because we know that those 3 parameters probably together play the largest role in sediment transport modeling. If you look at the parameters I used the 0.1, 1, 10. I didn't even bother to change the parameter from 1 to 2 or from 1 to 3 just to get a high R square. So I think machine learning and AI can play a very important role in future modeling effort. I mentioned the new model developed by Chris Sherwood and others, right? If you turn on the hydrodynamics, you turn on the flocculation, you turn on the seabed, you also add the beryllium 7 into the sediment, and you also trace by geochemical cycle. Gosh, it's going to be very, very computationally intensive. If you deal with a 3D model, you have many layers in the water, many layers on the seabed. It takes forever to finish the model run. And eventually, because the model run is so slow, it's just not practical to turn on all of them, okay? So that's a bottleneck for the numerical models. So here, I think machine learning and AI can probably help us to maybe train a model and figure out which top 10 parameters, for example, play the largest role in sediment transport modeling. And then the advantage of machine learning and AI is that you are not limited to just one model. You can use data from multiple modeling sources, or even use observational data. You can integrate a 1D, 2D, 3D data together to train the model. So I think there's a great opportunity for people to integrate ML AI with the traditional numerical models.
Thank you.
Just to follow up on Tian's question, it sounds like you're talking about the idea of using some kind of machine learning surrogate for the complicated sediment transport models so that you could get faster solutions to these really complicated interwoven nonlinear processes. I'm curious whether it sounds like you're working in kind of a data limited environment, as you only have a few sparse stations where you can monitor the seabed over time. To what extent are remote sensing methods, whether like repeated multi-beam surveys or even submersible drones, starting to change that? Are there places where you have kind of spatially distributed, rich data set that would be similar to something like a satellite image?
Mm-hmm. If we talk about satellite data, especially the satellite images, you get great spatial coverage, right? So that would be a valuable data set, and we can compare the sea surface conditions with whatever parameter you can get from remote sensing satellite images from the surface. But what I can tell you is that the biggest flux is always at the BBL, because the bottom is much more turbid, and it's very often that we find the sea bottom sediment concentration is 10 times higher than the sea surface, okay? So this is particularly true during the passage of a hurricane, okay? So that's one. Regarding the seabed morphology survey, yes, bathymetry, side scan, and sub-bottom data are very useful. I would say side scan data would be really useful to figure out where's the mud, where's the sand. US seabed is a great data set, but it's a compilation of grain size data collected over the past maybe 100 years. Okay, a long period. I know Chris Jenkins is doing a really great job in updating the US seabed database. So you get great spatial coverage, but I think if we target a smaller area, if we can repeat the side scan survey, we can actually get a better knowledge about the seabed reflectivity and the grain size information. So that would be great. But let me tell you this, it's very expensive to do multi-beam. You can only cover a small area.
Yeah.
And we have an ongoing project to collect the bathymetry data. We are collaborating with USGS as a whole. And just to survey this area, I'm highlighting just the bathymetry over here. And this is like a couple of $1 million. Wow. Yeah, because it's huge, a huge area. A multi-beam is very time consuming to survey.
Okay, well, we've just about to hit the top of the hour. Let's thank Kevin again for a fantastic and thought-provoking talk.
Thank you very much.